Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 2025 edition of Georgetown Center's Little Nuggets of Tech and Telecom. Jen, Happy New Year. I think I can still say that we're within the month of January, and I haven't seen you yet.
I know, and
So,
today is Chinese New Year, the year of the
yes, it
snake.
is.
So we'll see.
So I think even under Larry David's rules, I can still say Happy New Year to you.
That's right.
Super, super excited to introduce our new format for this year. So normally we only have one guest. We dive into just a handful of issues in great detail, which is fabulous. But there is so much going on in 2025 that we wanted to expand our guest speakers beyond just one, because there's so much to talk about, especially for our kickoff. So without further ado, let me introduce everyone. We have Shane Tews, who's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and also president of Logan Strategies. We've got Mike Dano, who is the lead editor for Light Reading, also Light Reading Cable, all things light reading. A seminal voice. And as we were saying before we went live, Mike has the title of guest who attracted the most number of attendees to our webinar in the last 2.5 years. So,
I
Mike, thank
did.
you for joining us.
I demand a recount.
And Trish, thank you very, very much. I think it's your first time joining us here at Georgetown's Little Nuggets. Really appreciate you making the time. Trish is a partner, Harris Wiltshire. The list of her accolades with the Republican National Lawyers Association, the Federalist Society, the work on international issues is very long and varied. Trish is a dear friend, and thank you very much for making the time to join us.
I'm also a Hoya by law school graduation. So
Oh, that's right.
yeah, so it's fun to be here. Thank you, Jennifer and Carolyn, for having me.
Absolutely. All right, so we were talking before we went live on who wants to go first. So obviously lots to talk about, but I'm going to zone in on Mr. Dano as our sole gentleman joining us today. Mike,
Yes.
let's talk deals. Every headline out there these days in our space is surmising who's going to get together with whom in 2025. I was curious what your thoughts are. What do you think we're going to see? What sort of tie-ups, if any?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's the fun game, right? I mean, we've got a new administration that has come in, presumably will be more open to, big corporate deals. And so, that leads to the next question. Well, if everything's on the table, what are the ones that are, likely to happen? And the two deals that I think are getting the most attention, probably because they're the biggest and sort of most would have the most impact, are, will Charter and Comcast merge, or will T-Mobile and Comcast merge? And I think, I don't have any insight into, whether or not those are going to happen any more than anyone else here, probably. But I think both are certainly possible. I've heard a lot of debate about, which of those two deals make the most sense. I'm not sure that I agree that one is necessarily makes more sense than the other. I think a lot of factors drive these kinds of deals, and we've seen really smart deals come and go. I think that the T-Mobile acquisition of Sprint, that I think really did pan out to be a really smart acquisition on the part of T-Mobile. And I think there's deals that just do not make any sense. We saw AT&T acquire Time Warner for some reason, and then eventually decide that that was not a great idea. I always like listening to the AT&T earnings calls during that period, because they talk about fiber, they talk about 5G, and then the CEO would be like, and then the Batman movie is going to come out, and it's going to be great. So you just had these like really weird earnings calls, and so. I don't know which one's going to happen. Comcast and Charter already work together in a lot of areas. So an acquisition of Charter by Comcast, or vice versa, however it goes down. I can see that synergy on a national level. I think that there'd be very little, or they're already the two of the biggest cable companies in the industry. So does it make sense to have them merged? Does that raise antitrust concerns? I would certainly think that it probably would be a big topic of discussion. But if T-Mobile acquired Charter, First of all, why would T-Mobile acquire Charter?
That's my question. What
Yeah,
what does it
exactly.
do for T-Mobile?
I mean, the obvious argument is that it gives them a wireline network, right? And
Mm.
so from the perspective of a T-Mobile competing against a Verizon and an AT&T, Verizon and AT&T both have big wireline networks. And so presumably T-Mobile, would, in order to compete against its rivals, it would want the same assets that its rivals have. On the other hand, you could say that, T-Mobile doesn't need Charter because it already has, its cell network works on top of a wireline network already, right? Like all cellular networks require an underlying wireline network. And T-Mobile already has an underlying wireline network. They've got deals with fiber providers, to backhaul all the traffic on their cell sites already. And buying Charter probably won't change that at all. They'll probably still use the same backhaul that they've already set up. Maybe they'll change a few, circuits and a few towers where Charter's network is in order to run it over Charter's network that it owns. But the lowering the cost of their transport is probably not going to be a big driver for that acquisition. I would assume it's more about, they're getting all these customers. Maybe they'll upgrade large chunks of Charter's DOCSIS network to a fiber network. I mean, that's where everybody's headed, right? Is toward fiber and away from copper or cable. So maybe they'd have some sort of calculation around that. Hard to say. There's a lot of talk about, bundled services, and T-Mobile certainly is already doing that. I mean, they're selling fixed wireless, alongside a smartphone.
Mhm.
So they're doing that across the country. And so presumably an acquisition of Charter would sort of allow them to accelerate that and also mix and match different things they could do fixed wireless, they could do, DOCSIS, they could do fiber, they could be upgrading fiber, they could sell wireless, they could presumably sell satellite connections, they could sell, they could offer Netflix on us, they have a banking solution. You can kind of see that they would start to
I
integrate.
just wanted to ask, I mean, their convergence theme is definitely a big theme for wireless and wireline now, like wireless needs wires, as you noted. But when T-Mobile bought Sprint, Sprint was like on its heels. Charter has had issues. And the T-Mobile stock has done very well. I'm not asking you to be an analyst, but do you think T-Mobile would lean into that disruption and heavy lift of redoing Charter, and how would shareholders, or, do you think, because it changes the story dramatically?
Yeah, it really does change the story dramatically. And that's the thing I'm wondering is, like, would that really be a negative to the stock because they're acquiring what you could argue would be a huge albatross that they now have to deal with and find some way to integrate.
Right.
And so from the T-Mobile story, if they're really looking to sort of, galvanize and look toward the future, and, we're an innovative company that's, really on the cutting edge, I'm not sure that an acquisition of Charter would help that narrative.
Would help that narrative.
Right?
Ask you this, Mike, do you see any, not that we're done talking about what, possible combinations, including some of the smaller fiber guys getting together, maybe there's some assets there that T-Mobile or others could pick up, but looking outside just our little piece of the industry, and by our, I mean the telecom space, do you see any interest in any of these assets, whether it's cable or
Yeah.
wireless,
Yeah, I was
by
going to say
satellite
that-
companies or by the tech companies?
that's exactly what I was going to say. There's a lot of talk about the big mega mergers, but I actually wrote down a whole thing about, some of the other areas that I think we're definitely going to see activity. And I think that, yeah, you mentioned the first one, which was sort of the smaller fiber companies. And so I actually, right before this started, I had one of the things I've been trying to do on a daily, hourly basis is just ask AI. Whatever I'm wondering about, I ask AI. And I ask the Twitter AI, I ask ChatGPT, I ask the Google AI, and just I like to see what their different responses are. And so I asked them this question, which is, what are the smaller fiber providers in the US that are not owned by a big company? Because those are all, I think, acquisition targets. And so, it listed Brightspeed, Allo, Hotwire, Breezeline, Astound. And then several of them mentioned Ziply, as being an independent one, but I think they're in the process of being acquired by
right.
GE. So
Yep.
my point there is that a lot of the AI is always wrong on stuff like this. I actually find the Twitter one to be the best about current events and sort of explaining things, what's happening in real time. And so I think the Twitter one correctly identified Sipley as having been already acquired. And then when you tell it, it's like, no, I think that's being acquired. They'll be like, oh, right, you're right. And here's all the details. It's like, why didn't you get that ahead of time? Anyway, my point is that you're right. I think that the smaller fiber providers, all of those are acquisition targets for who knows, Verizon, AT&T, we can just pretty much all of them, I think, would be interested in those companies. And I think it's definitely a land grab right now for who can come in as maybe ideally the first, hopefully the second, probably not the third, but maybe the third fiber provider in any given, sort of larger size or even small market. I think everybody wants to be there. But I also think, so those are definitely acquisition targets. I would not be surprised at all to hear about a T-Mobile or AT&T joint venture to acquire any of those. That's how they like to seem to go to market, is with these joint ventures with the to offset the funding thing. But I also think the other one that I think is not quite as obvious, but I definitely expect to be a topic this year is satellite spectrum. So we saw AST Space Mobile buy the spectrum from troubled Legato. They got the spectrum that is actually not troubled. It's pretty untroubled, but still they paid not a huge amount, but they paid some money for that spectrum. But I think that SES and Intelsat, they're still trying to get their merger done. They are still using a lot of C-band spectrum. They have said they're trying to sell that. Viasat is working on building some kind of network with their satellite spectrum. And so I think, and there's tons of interest in the 5G industry about how to incorporate satellites into your operations. And so the S-band, L-band satellite holdings, I think, are going to get a lot of interest in this new era where you can sort of mix and match all kinds of mergers and everything is on the table. I think that's going to be a sort of a real one to watch. And maybe SpaceX doesn't really own any spectrum, right? But Elon Musk has got a bunch of money. Would he acquire spectrum? Is that going to create even more, potential for SpaceX and Starlink to be a competitor to Telecom? Is Apple and Globalstar, are they going to pursue more spectrum? There's certainly indications that Apple and Globalstar are going to pursue even more spectrum holdings to increase whatever they're doing. Globalstar is building a whole new constellation for Apple. So I really think that whole satellite thing is it's going to be a real interesting one to watch. And I know we have some spectrum experts here, and I always think of I really like to focus on the terrestrial spectrum, the spectrum that AT&T and T-Mobile use. And then when I try to dabble in the satellite spectrum licensing and ownership rules, it's like Olympic level spectrum. It's so hard to understand. I can barely, it's a global, it's run through Luxembourg. It's just crazy stuff. So,
which might be the perfect segue to Tricia. So because spectrum is I'm going to call it the elephant in the room. I mean, Carolyn, would you agree in this?
I mean, elephant in the room, indicates that it's a topic that nobody's talking about. I would say everybody's talking about spectrum. I mean, even the nomination for Secretary of Commerce today, pointed out that the Defense Department obviously sits on a lot of spectrum. And he, said he appreciates that we need to protect our national security, but there's got to be a balance here. And I think he said something like, hey, as your Secretary of Commerce, I'm going to lean towards commerce in terms of allocations of spectrum. So I just thought it was interesting that it came up in the Secretary of Commerce, which makes sense because he's sitting on top of NTIA, which is going to be the agency that's dealing with all of that. But to your point, Jen, I wanted to ask Trish, in light of some of these deals that Mike was talking about, what do you see as the environment these days at the FCC, at DOJ, in terms of an appetite for more transactions?
Yeah, and I would say, thanks for the question. Again, it's fun to be here. Yeah, I think there is very much a healthy appetite, right? I mean, at the highest level, the Trump administration policy is to help, and the Secretary of Commerce nominee said this today, right? Just to help businesses do better, be healthier, grow the economy. So I think, yeah, you will see a more pragmatic look at these proposed mergers to see, okay, is this going to make the sector more competitive? Is it, is it going to help business produce more jobs? And of course, still using the consumer protection standard. Because it'll be interesting at Justice, right? We've have the nominee Gail Slater for the assistant AG for antitrust. She comes, as you all know, from the Trump White House in the first administration, and so she'll have some of that orientation with her. At the FCC, it is a different standard, right? They have the public interest standard, but new Chairman Carr has said his priorities will be spectrum, the space economy, infrastructure. And of course, national security as well. He's been a big one banging the drum, along with former Chairman Rosenworcel on national security. But all to say, I think they will take pragmatic looks at, okay, if on the satellite direct-to-device, trend, if this is what, folks want, and there's obviously synergies, and you're supporting consumers by building out, broadband into the hinterlands where wired networks or cellular networks even aren't as cost efficient. Yeah, that's wonderful. Let's go for it. And I think, well, Mike said it's complex. Sure, it's complex, but some of the complexity, right, is the International Telecom Union. They are studying this in the upcoming World Radio Conference. There are no less than 3 different agenda items that are studying, how to authorize, allocate more spectrum for either direct-to-device specifically or mobile satellite generally. And mobile satellite being, is the terminal mobile. So yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of energy there, and a more pragmatic approach to combinations. If this is going to grow the economy, help business while still protecting consumers.
That was interesting. There was a piece out today from Stephen Moore. He's also he's an economist. Was working with the Trump administration the first time around, and his point is, I'm reacting, Trish, and Mike, to your comment that it's complicated. It is extremely complicated on many levels, but on the other hand, it's super simple, right? DoD sitting on a bunch, commercial mobile sitting on a little by comparison. And if you auction spectrum, you can have a lot of money to take care of a bunch of the Trump policy priorities, which was essentially the point in Stephen's piece. So given that our discussion is supposed to be in the weeds, that's where we run into the complications. Curious if you see, Trish, any movement, any interest, whether at Carr, in Carr's office in particular, or just sort of in policy circles, of going after the public interest standard and changing it. Over the years, we've heard lots of discussion that the FCC, can often use the public interest standard to attach all kinds of ornaments to a merger, right, that have nothing to do with the actual transaction. And I know that's been frustrating under both both Democrat and Republican administrations. Curious if you think this is going to be part of the conversation under a Carr FCC.
I'm sure there'll be, public interest groups that want that and request it and lobby for that. But I haven't spoke with the chairman on this, but I think he will resist those temptations and kind of stick more towards, a traditional economic benefit, right? And again, the public interest is much more broad in the FCC's statute and history. DOJ has more of a kind of formulaic approach. Obviously, we've seen in the last administration, Lena Khan go beyond that formula. But no, I think he will not load up any kind of conditional tree with all the stuff we've seen in prior merger grants.
So, not to suggest that we shouldn't keep talking about spectrum, because that's sort of what I love to talk about. But moving aside to and taking a look at, what do you see as the potential outcome of this freeze on federal funding with respect to BEAD?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Certainly, I know that's caused shockwaves around the country, and of course, the freeze was on all federal grant programs, right? So it was very shocking. I was going to say, for those of you with clients, we've all gotten requests. I'll just reiterate what the secretary nominee said today, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, that yeah, it's a 90-day freeze. We'll give them a chance to review the program, see how to build broadband out to the states most efficiently. So not to claw back all that $42 billion, but to make sure that it is being done the most efficient way possible. I think a lot of us love wireless spectrum, right? And, obviously the Biden-Harris administration put their thumb on the finger of fiber deployments, and fiber obviously has its place, as Big Mike and others said. Wireless just means less wires. You still need, you still need your cable, you still need your fiber, but for some deployments, obviously satellite or wireless would have been far more cost efficient, right? And of course we know, either fixed wireless access, even Wi-Fi, right, can be delivering broadband speeds and a far more efficient cost point. So I'll take him at his word. I think the program will get going again, but and whether all those grants will flow within 90 days or not, or if there will be a lot of renegotiating, time will tell. But from the senators' questions, it seemed, some of the more egregious irritants for them, at least on the Republican side, was, why do you have climate change, reporting requirements? Why do why do the subgrantees, the ISPs, actually have to hire justice-involved workers? Why do you have to have, and equity is built into the act, right? But, perhaps the Biden-Harris administration took that and ran with it, right? So I think we'll certainly see that cleaned up, but it probably will take a little bit more than 90 days to get that out. But I think it will go forward, because there's pressure on the R and the D side, Republican and Democrats, to get that money out to the states. And Howard Lutnick even said, yes, broadband infrastructure is critical, and he was responding to Republican senators when he said that.
Question about USF. Where does that whole conversation that was happening before the election, does that continue, or do you see just an overall pause and a recalibration of these subsidy programs?
Yeah, I think the conversation definitely continues, because one, it's frozen as well, or 90-day review period, and hopefully that will inspire Congress to finally. I mean, I know they've been working. There's bipartisan USF reform task groups up there, but it's been easy to kick it down the can, for decades now, right? And now we're at over a third of covered telecom providers' revenues are subject to that. I mean, it's crazy. It's not sustainable. It's highly distortive. I think, and I don't want to speak for Senator Cruz, but I think he had some ideas out there, to make it even subject to annual appropriations, which of course the industry won't want. But they're certainly going to continue to talk about it, and this freeze does kind of force them to be a little more serious. If they don't do it, like every other Congress since the 1996 Act has not done it,
Right.
I think Chairman Carr will be inspired to reform it. He's been public on the record now, before he was chair, that broadening the contribution base, perhaps bringing in some of the tech providers, and to help it be more sustainable. So I think the conversation will continue.
Okay. Shane, you're languishing over there in the left-hand corner
No,
of my
I'm learning
screen.
a whole lot. I kind of wish you just let these two others keep going. I'm learning. When I'm talking, I'm not learning. So,
So, first of all, how was CES this year? I know you were out there, you were, posting from the floor. There were one or two items that I would love to purchase, including the bejeweled earbud / microphone getup. So cute. But I was curious, what was the vibe? What was like the cool thing that everybody was talking about? Parenthetical, we understand it's AI, but was there anything else anybody was talking about?
yeah. So I decided, for those of you who've been to CS, you know how overwhelming it is. That sometimes you just have to get on something and focus. So I decided to focus on wearables. I have a lot of friends who wear Oura rings. I don't understand it. I know when I'm not sleeping, but they tell me that it's healthy. But what they've done is they have added a layer of artificial intelligence into the app for these, appliances. And what makes that interesting is the implications for more precision medicine and the future of healthcare. So transforming healthcare is with big data, using wearables is where that is all headed. It's a driver of growth, especially we have an aging population, increased healthcare demands for aging populations, and the ability to get more consistent data into the networks for not only for the individual, but their health provider is a real key thing. We've also seen a change over the last decade in allowing wearable information to actually be used by medical professionals. For a long time, because of the rules of HHS, they didn't let you send your information from your Apple device or wherever into them. We also have kind of still a post-pandemic priority. There's a heightened focus on preventative healthcare and mental well-being, and that is a lot of things like your temperature, different things that you can see where you can tell you're starting to get sick and wanting to get in there and get preventative where that's possible, as well as the technological advantages of wearables to not only just telemedicine and personalized health form, but it's just transforming healthcare delivery altogether. So remote patient monitoring and telehealth services were definitely a highlight. Digital therapeutics and mental health, and much more smaller, easy to manage, device form factors. The main thing here is looking at also data privacy concerns. They were cognizant of that this is, people want to know where their data is being shared, that they can have some control over it, especially since this is personal healthcare information, as well as looking at the regulatory hurdles for emerging health technologies. So when they hear that you work on policy, they're more than happy to chat with you about that. Of course, all of this only works if we have a healthy network backbone.
Right. So, and also talk to us a little bit about AI, all kidding aside. I know that was a big overlay. We saw it in the press reports coming out, but aside from the wearable space and preventative health, what was the overriding point on AI? Are people just trying to figure out how to monetize it, how to do it? What was the takeaway?
Once you get past just putting the AI sticker on your box and saying I'm AI enabled. A couple years ago, I actually wrote a piece that was like when you went, everything was Alexa enabled. Everything became voice enabled. That was about 5-6 years ago. And so now everybody's jumping to become AI enabled. And what that means is helping people with the predictive analysis of just utilizing the device. So actually being Alexa enabled allows it to be more AI enabled and figure out what you want and how to personalize that. Where that actually went to was a lot of robot things. I'm not as excited about robots as other people are, but there were a lot of robots at this show, and it's that idea of having that helper. Where I do get excited about it is if I really do get to have my own C3PO. I would let that little thing just follow me around all day long and tell me stuff, because it's really smart and you just constantly like looking at it like your own little diplomatic friend over here. So there was quite a bit about that around artificial intelligence, and it's really is the year for enterprise to embrace AI more so than even at the consumer level. We're starting to see this be really very real in the very big companies.
And Shane, as some of you know, I was at PTC last week, the data, I'll call the data center show, and it was like a report called it, rainbows and fairy tales. And then we wake up Monday morning to this DeepSeek news. I mean, a large part of the hyperscaler spend has been like, anywhere from 250 to 300 billion in total CapEx next year. And I'm curious, do you feel like that in the wake of this week's news? And I think Alibaba announced something this morning. Could that pause? Could we see the hyperscalers retrench a bit in terms of spending, or is that genie out of the bottle?
I think pause is the professional word. The not so professional word is didn't see that coming. So what, for those who have been busy doing something else, I mean, I realized it was the first 4 days of an administration last week. DeepSeek is a Chinese app that all of a sudden appeared. It seemed out of nowhere. It was the #1 app in the Apple App Store last week. And what it is that the founders of DeepSeek have created a clever way to build a robust AI using less energy, to what Jennifer's question is about, and compute power that is just more efficient than what we've seen so far in a lot of the American models. So what this is like is discovering how to make a super efficient car engine, but that performs just as easily, but with less gas. So there is the main question on, do we need to be investing so much in not only putting power stations back online like we see with 3 Mile Island, but like actually going to build more power stations. I think what it is maybe we need to be thinking broader than artificial intelligence on that. Actually, Larry Fink did a really interesting piece back in November, just saying, why are we still using 1970s regulations of the energy industry to decide how we're living in 2025 forward. And so I think that's probably, from a policy perspective, we need to keep having the conversations around privacy or power. It's a matter of AI kind of put it into the forefront of everyone's minds, but I think we'll continue to have some really serious conversations about that.
You know, to that point, Shane, I often ask my question, myself the question, why is it that how you should be configuring your network of the future is subject to 1934 regulations when some of this technology wasn't even available. And here I'm talking about the retirement of copper and, you know, in deploying fiber and the fact that, you know, some states look at that and think, oh my God, no, we can't let you do that. It seems a little bit insane. Mike, question for you. Aside from the big mergers and transactions we were talking about earlier, what are we to make this year of the stories that talk about the influx of private equity and, you know, folks in the investment community, aside from the usual investors in this space, kind of looking around for places to park their money? Is that implications for telecom, for any of these fiber companies? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know much about that, to be honest. I mean, that there has been that element of private equity investment in wireless or in telecom broadly for a while. But yeah, we've seen it sort of increasing in recent years with you know, the joint ventures between you're right. You're talking about like the T-Mobile joint venture with KKR and the other one, can't remember.
Yeah, Lumos, yeah.
Yeah, and AT&T's got a similar one for their gigapower fiber thing. And so I would expect that, I mean, I'm just assuming that investment will at least stay at the same level as last year, if not significantly increase this year along all those same trends. So if we saw a little bit of it last year, I'm expecting we'll see probably as much, if not more, this year, just based on the sort of vibes and general excitement level about, you know, AI and other things.
Mike,
So,
can I
Jen, I
ask?
was going to ask you a question. I know I'm
Sure.
breaking the quote fourth wall or something by asking
Sure,
the
sure.
moderator, but curious from your perspective. I mean, you're watching these money flows. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with what Mike said at the beginning. It's like all about fiber. I mean, I didn't word search the word fiber in the AT&T earnings call, but I'm guessing it was north of 30 times mentioned. And I guess you are seeing this whole convergence theme really take shape because you see tangible improvements in churn and ARPU and whatnot when you have that bundle. But one of the things I was gonna, you know, ask Mike is, you know, do you as a reporter or even analyst, there's so much talk about fiber for AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, but in the case of AT&T, last I checked, 70%, if not higher, of their cash flow comes from wireless, which brings in the whole spectrum discussion. Do you feel like that is not being focused on as much as it should, and they're kind of running toward the fiber?
Yeah, the rush toward fiber is really interesting, right? Yeah, I like the talk about how many F-bombs AT&T had fiber, the word fiber bomb, 35 fiber words in their current call. But yeah, man, the rush toward fiber is really quite surprising. I mean, I think it's partly just because of the BEAD program.
Yeah.
Put such an emphasis on fiber, and so it really got all those fiber engines going. And the realization that, you know, even if you were maybe the second fiber provider in a market, you could still be profitable. And so I think the fiber calculation is obviously changing a little bit. And if you have a fiber network in a location, you have a better opportunity to, whatever it is, sell more TV services or sell more smartphone services, whatever that is. I think it's a good thing to have. It's just a long-term investment. And in terms of I'm not sure how long that's going to go.
Yeah.
You know, the whole fiber push right now. I don't know how many markets how many providers in one market, you know, can be supported, and how many, you know, is it going to be a 500-person town that needs a fiber connection? Is, you know, I do. I think if they come through with more spectrum, I do think that I would not be surprised if they start pivoting toward fixed wireless. You know, if the BEAD rules loosen up toward fixed wireless or satellite, or if more spectrum comes to market, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a pivot away from fiber.
So, Jen, can I just throw out a slightly different thought? And that is not inconsistent, Mike, with what you just said, but if you take a step back from just this year, I think, the companies have been maybe not using the word convergence, but if you look at sort of what they're doing, and here by the companies, I mean the ISPs in the telecom space. I mean, they've been executing, it looks like at this point, against a plan to be able to provide connectivity of any stripe to a variety of its customer bases, whether it's enterprise or consumer. So to me, the push for fiber, certainly for AT&T, which was a little bit behind the ball compared to Verizon back in the day, is consistent with an overall push to offer a panoply of converged services. So if you can pull fiber like T-Mobile did to the tower, I mean, that's going to make your speeds even faster, even if you have a realized 5G, even assuming we do get more access to full power commercial. I think that fiber connection as part of that wireless network essentially catalyzes and enhances the connectivity that the spectrum is going to get you. So I see the two, I think the BEAD program certainly enhanced and maybe sped up some of the interest in certain markets. But I just, being around the industry for the last couple of years, I think everybody's been focused on that convergence angle. And, you see that sort of coming to fruition in lots of more explicit ways. Trish, question, actually, I got this from a Georgetown student last night. I was subbing in. In light of the sort of large, big picture perspective of, America first under the Trump administration, and do you see any implications for WRC coming up in 2027? Do we not show up, or do you envision us not having a contingent?
WRC being World Radio Congress.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'll answer in a second, but I want to talk about Mike's response. Yeah, fiber, even in a tier 2 smaller market, might help with data center builds out there. And as some of the big data center, like Ashburn, Virginia, or Atlanta is really, really hot, those are getting saturated politically, right? And now you are looking at some data center builders trying to go to smaller markets where they can, supply that kind of processing, commuting in those markets. So fiber is also an economic, driver there too. But anyway, yes, the work. Yes, the president has made some remarks. Well, he's already pulled out of the World Health Organization. The World Radio Communications Conference is hosted by the International Telecom Union and another UN specialized agency. But I suspect that as if Howard Lutnick is read in and confirmed, and his NTIA person is appointed, they will understand. And of course, some of the folks named are, Senator Cruz's aide, for one, certainly understands the importance of the World Radio Conference. But the world, the industry, our military, our sciences, they need internationally harmonized spectrum. So I don't think, of course, President Trump hasn't spoke to me about this, but I do not think he will want to pull back from that. I do, and those of you who may have tuned into the House hearing last week, there was a lot of questions from the members, both of the Republicans and the Democrats, but about how we were going to be better prepared for this World Radio Conference, which is in 2027. And to your listeners, viewers, that might sound like a long, long time off, but it actually, the deadline for getting, one set of the information in for the studies was last year. So, it does take a full 4 years of all these studies, and the studies are negotiated. Like we're already well into the prep work. I do think the president will have a strong contingent that will field that, because it is so crucial to be harmonized. And as we heard Secretary Commerce nominee say today, we want to have American-driven standards, American-driven, technology advances, and that would suggest then you have to show up to the ITU for these conferences.
Okay. I have one more question, and then I was going to hand it over to Jen to bring us to close. This is a question from our audience, and that is, do either of you, or maybe both of you can react to this or comment on it, do you anticipate the CAR FCC taking a different approach with respect to dish spectrum?
I'm going to let Mike handle that one.
Yeah, Dish, Boost, EchoStar, Republic Wireless, whatever the name they're using this week has long been an interesting company to watch for sure. And under their original deal, as part of the T-Mobile Sprint merger, they can sell their spectrum in 2026. And whether the car FCC, I mean, the real goal was to make Dish the fourth national wireless network operator to replace Sprint that was bought by T-Mobile. And I would assume that Carr would like to retain that ultimately. But I mean, if you look at Dish's progress so far, they're not really making a lot of progress toward being that fourth operator. They do have a network. They're losing customers. They don't really have much impact in the market. And so when 2026 rolls around, or if Carr decides that they're just not cutting it anymore, I can see that the fact that they're not really having an impact in the market to be a real motivating factor toward, like, yes, they can sell their spectrum. I think that's a legitimate argument.
I'll just add on just a little bit.
Please.
Yeah.
Had Kamala Harris won, right? And you had a continuation of the public wireless R&D program, which was on Open RAN technology. Dish was a large recipient of that.
Right.
So you could see maybe a Biden-Harris administration or a Rosenworcel, continuation, trying to keep them alive and well to try to implement the Open RAN technology. But, I'm not certain that Chairman Carr has bought into the narrative that Open RAN was the silver bullet to help us fight back against Huawei, in our networks. And so just it'll be good luck to Dish, but they don't really have the same degree of champion buy-in at this point.
Great. Well,
Great.
I
Over to you,
asked
Jen.
if I could ask each of you like one kind of pointed question at the end here, with each of your different specialties. So maybe Mike, I'll ask you first. Your favorite child on the wireless side, if we had to like look in the crystal ball a year from now, who is the one who's executing on all fronts, and it isn't doing a misstep?
Yeah, I mean, T-Mobile, they've been just killing it for
Yeah.
years now. And I really do think, Verizon for so long had the best network, and they just cannot comprehend the idea that all the networks are relatively equal. T-Mobile's is a little bit better. So I really don't think it's a good idea to bet against T-Mobile still. I mean, they just have such a good position. They've come so far, and there's even talk now about them passing Verizon in market share.
Interesting.
And like, I just, that idea was so foreign 2 years ago. And now I think it's actually, you really can consider whether that's going to happen. So, I mean, AT&T has been doing fine. I think they'll continue to do fine. But really, T-Mobile's in the driver's seat. So it's their game right now.
Okay. Wow. All right, Trish. Your question is, if again, crystal ball, I don't know, maybe I'll say 3 years from now, is the lower 3 gigahertz band in the midst of carriers, or is the DoD still bear hugging it with dear life?
I think 3.1 to 3.3 will still be bear hugged. I could be wrong, and I'm not actively engaged in those discussions. I do think there'll be some more commercial access in 3.3 to 3.45. Again, I'm not active in those. But and the industry's done a lot of work in there under paths. Now, whether the new NTIA will continue the National Spectrum Strategy or rename it, or they'll decide to expedite those studies, as Chairman Carr, right? When the National Spectrum Strategy came out, then Commissioner Carr was very critical that it was a plan to have a plan, or a study to have a study. So I think we'll see some expedition there. But yeah, I do think military will still be in the lower band, but I'm not paid to have opinions on that one.
Okay. And then Shane, I have 2 for you. So we talked about DeepSeek and all that's coming. I guess if I could ask, in the wake of Project Stargate, which came last week, I mean, these headlines have been fast and furious, which is a $500 billion build for an AI data center in West Texas. Will this put this concern about China put a deep freeze on the infrastructure, as we said, if they're like meh or or does that just fuel the fire under Trump in the quest to beat China and his team to just go put the pedal further on the metal?
Well, I think they're going to need the infrastructure anyway. So
Anyway.
I think it would make sense for them to keep going forward, all political rhetoric aside. I think
Yeah.
part of the concern or interest has been that people thought that after all the cutting and all these 90-day freezes, that Stargate was a government program. And so I just want to clarify for everybody that this is private investment money. The president was very excited about it, so he wanted to talk about it out loud.
Right.
And they are still going to need a whole lot of compute, even if they have to compete with China to be the best in class of what they're doing. So I think that we'll continue to see that move forward.
And then if I, like Mike, could ask you to pick your favorite child in the, the hyperscaler space, who's doing the best in terms of an AI? Is it Microsoft? Is it Amazon? Is it Meta, Google? You know the players better than I.
Yeah, I have to admit, I use all of them. And I had a discussion about this yesterday, that we all like to pit them against each other. And sometimes you take information from one and put it into another. And some are just a little better and more nuanced at writing than they are about, things that are math skills. So I can't pick a child. Sorry. I love them all.
Okay, great. Well, those were my questions.
And we are exactly at 12:45. We could talk for another, I think, 45 minutes easily, but I promised we would not go longer than 45 minutes. Thank you each very, very much for joining us. I appreciate the time. Great conversation. Jen, I thought this was a really nice way to kick off the year. I think it's going to be very, very busy. And I think what we hear is keep your ear to the ground and your eyes open. Lots of things up in the air right now.
Thank you so much. Totally agree. And Happy New Year to everyone. Looking forward to
Likewise.
our next
Thank you.
session.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.